Hello, I, Dr. Kavita Singh, Associate Professor of Law, working in WBNUJS for last 15 years, would like to present before you a module on titled Internal Security Law in India from Past to Present. India's restless democratic state faces numerous internal security challenges and is hobbled by confused policy responses and continuing deficits in the capabilities. The system has nevertheless established extraordinary pliability and has several dramatic successes to its credit. In India, coexistence of extreme poverty and lack of opportunities with rapid economic growth and easy wealth making creates what to India the synchronized large terror acts on the Indian soil demonstrated the increasing ability of the terrorists to exploit the abundant communication infrastructure for collaboration, financing, intelligence gathering and execution of terror attacks. This was further accentuated by the weak infrastructure and homeland security apparatus. In the ancient period, the Hindu societal institutions and the beliefs have gradually developed and flourished since ancient India existed. Ancient Hindu ideology is thus deeply rooted in the belief of people even today. During ancient Hindu period, punishment was considered to be a sort of expiation and that removed impurities from the man, revived him of sinful prompting and reformed his character. According to Manu, a person who is found guilty of crime and punishment by the king goes to heaven and becomes pure like those who perform extraordinary deeds. Punishment served four purposes in the ancient period. Firstly, to meet the urge of people who suffered. Secondly, for revenge or retaliation. Thirdly, as deterrent and preventive measures. And fourthly, for information or redemption of the evildoer. Dharma Shastras on internal security. One aspect of dharma is security for the ruler and his domain. Danda should be used to implement dharma, writes Manu, which means keeping the four castes within the neighboring kingdom within their proper place. The policy of using danda is also known as the Dandaniti, which according to Manu was equivalent to Rajniti or governance. King is the protector of dharma. As regards of the kingdom's internal security, Manusmriti says that the rod alone chastises the subject, protects them and stays away while they are fast asleep. While men know that thus justice is the rod, Manu warns the ruler for judicious use of force. Deployment of too much and too little force is dangerous. Then artha and kama goes against dharma. The former two should be abandoned by the king. A king who wishes to win the position of Indra and incorruptive unfading fame should not even for a moment overlook a man of violence. A man who commits violence should be regarded as the most evildoer, worse than a man who commits verbal assault, a thief or a man who injures someone with a rod. A king who tolerates someone bent on violence quickly goes to his own destruction and gains hatred. Neither as a result of friendship nor for the sake of getting a great deal of money should a king set free men of violence, who cause terror to all living beings. A man who kills with justice in self-defense, in a struggle for the sacrificial gift, or in order to protect women and priest does nothing wrong. A man may without hesitation kill anyone who attacks him with a weapon in his hand, even if it is his guru, a child or an old man or a priest thoroughly. vested in the Veda. There is no stain at all for killer in slaying a man who has a weapon in his hand, whether he does it openly or secretly. Rage befalls rage. Manu designates state having 6 parts as given in the chart below: king, ministry, territories, forts, treasure, army. Now state is within the picture. Who controls? Kautilyan view on the internal security management. Kautilya believes that offensive action is based on defensive power. His insistence on internal security clearly underlines the fact that before forces are committed to the main task, all own vital vulnerable tasks should be secured. In case of a threat of revolt, Kautilya advises the king to remain behind in the capital and allow his Senapati to lead a campaign. This, coupled with the fact that he attached great importance to controlling the army, highlights that internal security must be sound foundation for a successful campaign. Although the Arthashastra emphasizes devious warfare, Kautyayuddha, it prescribes that if a king has a clear superior force and other factors are favorable, he should engage in open and rule-bound warfare. Prakasha Yuddha. Obviously, in Kautilya's mind, a certain amount of odium continued to be associated with devious warfare. Whatever the form of warfare, the Arthashastra is scrupulous about one principle: not to cause harm to the subject of the enemy king. Thus, when laying a siege to the fort, the people inside must be assured of safety and allowed to leave the fort after it captured. If territory must be annexed, it was usually not annexed, only the king was forced to become an ally or a vassal, while the people were to be won over by other means. Their customs must be respected and their gods must be revered. After the war, carrying away loot is forbidden. If the king was reduced to vassalage, he was still permitted to retain control of his territory and army. Coming to system of penalties was highly centralized and regulated by the Kautilyan state. The aim of punishment was to maintain social order, to prevent misbehavior by civil servants, including exploitation of the public and causing loss to the state, revenue, and to avoid the danger of disaffection, revolts and rebellions. Revolts and rebellion were ever present, dangers for the king. All potential traitors could act by themselves, collude with each other, or be instigated by the enemy king. A particular cause of rebellion was discontent among the populace. Kautilya attaches great importance to the well-being of the people. If they become improvised, greedy and rebellious, then the king shall employ without hesitation the methods of secret punishment against traitors. Medieval period. In the medieval period, the Muslim criminal law broadly classified crimes under 3 heads: crime against God, crime against sovereign, and crime against private individuals. The second category include such crimes which can be equated with the crime against humanity. The punishment for various offences were into 4 categories, viz. Had, Tazir, Kisa, which was communicable into Diya, Kisa or retaliation, meant in principle. Life for life and limb for limb, Diya or Dyut means blood money. In cases where the accused intentionally injured the victim, Diya was awarded to the victim on a fixed scale. In cases of intentional injuries or wounding, offence Diya in lieu of Kisa was applied. Punishment of Diya was an alternative to Kisa. Had etymologically meant boundary or limit. According to law, it means specific penalties for specific offences. The underlying idea was to prescribe, define and fix the nature, quantity and quality of punishment for certain offences, which the society regarded as antisocial or anti-religious. The Muslim law considered treason as a crime against God and religion and therefore against the state. Death penalty was awarded to the person connected with the responsibility for treason. No sympathy or consideration was shown for his or her rank, religion and caste. Coming to British period, pre-British, pre-independence era, the Bengal Regulating Act of 1812 and Regulating Act of 1819 were some of the earliest laws in the British India to deal with the internal security, incorporate the provisions of preventive detention without having to commit to the detainee to trial. In the presidencies of Madras and Bombay, similar laws had then been enacted in 1819 and 1827 respectively. Prisoners under these regulations had no right of habeas corpus. Section 491 of the Criminal Procedure Code introduced the writ of habeas corpus in 1882. In 1907, emergency ordinances were issued in Punjab and in Eastern Bengal and Assam on the 50th anniversary of 1857 mutiny. This disallowed people meeting and the Indian press was subjected to control to limit rebellious materials being published. The Explosive Substances Act and the Newspaper Act were passed in June 1908 to try and arrest agitators. In June 1907, local governments were further authorized to initiate measures against local press, publishing serious material among civilian population or the army. The Indian sociologist was banned in India in September 1907 and in November that year Prevention of Seditious Meetings Act was passed. February 1910 saw the introduction of Indian Press Act which allowed provincial governments to ask for punitive securities up to Rs 5,000 from newspapers likely to incite sedition and violence. This act resulted in number of nationalist publications closing down, unable to provide such a surety. Freedom movement and internal security. Indian soldiers serving the British Indian Army were discontented that there was resentment among them. 100 years of popular discontent took the form of armed resistance led by the deposed chieftains of their descendants and relations, zamindars and polygars and ex-soldier of officials and other retainers of Indian states. Large section of the peasantry and the artisan joined these revolts because of their own grievances and hardship, often forming a backbone of these revolts. These civil rebellions began with the very establishment of British rule in Bengal and Bihar, intensification of the land revenue demand, exploitation of artisan by East India Company and its servants, and the uprooting of old zamindars created explosive situation. Popular revolts occurred in almost every district and province. The revolt began with the mutiny of the sepoy on the Indian soldiers of the East India Company's army, but soon engulfed wild regions and people. It was product of the accumulated grievances of the people against the foreign government. The annexionist policy followed by the British Viceroy Lord Dalhousie also created panic among rulers of the native states. These rulers realized that total submission and humiliating declaration of loyalty to the foreign power could not guarantee their existence. This policy of annexation was, for example, directly responsible for making Nana Sahib, the Rani of Jhansi, and Bahadur Shah staunch enemies of British. The company soldiers or the sepoys were discontented with the low pay and hard life and the contemptuous treatment meted out to them by their British officers. The failure of the revolt of 1857 was a great blow to the nation, and although a general depression had overwhelmed the country's effort to overthrow British rule, never ceased. In 1858, following the mutiny and seemingly as a direct outcome, the East India Company was dismantled and its power of government passed directly to the British Crown. Lord Stanley was successful in passing the bill through both the houses of Parliament. That bill is known as the Government of India Act 1858. The period from 1858, when the Governor of India began to be conducted in the name of Sovereign of England, to 1937, when provincial autonomy was inaugurated under the reformed Constitution of 1935, marks a distinct epoch in the Indian history. The age is capable of twofold division: the era of imperialism 1858 to 1905 and the epoch of reform 1905 to 1937. In the assembly bomb case, Bhagat Singh and B.K. Dutt were tried. Later, Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev, Rajguru and 10 of the other revolutionaries were tried in series of famous conspiracy cases. Their fearless defiant attitude in the court were reported in the daily newspapers. Uprisingly, they won the support of the people all over the country, including those who had complete faith in non-violence. The country was also stirred by the prolonged hunger strike the revolutionary under-trials undertook as a protest against the horrible conditions in jail. They demanded that they be treated not as criminals but as political prisoners. The entire nation was behind the hunger strike. On Gandhiji's return to India on 20th December 1931, found government repression in full swing. His request for an interview with the Viceroy was refused, and on 1st January 1932, the working committee of the Congress adopted a resolution for the renewal of civil disobedience and the boycott of British goods. On January 4th, Gandhiji was arrested. At the end of the March 1933, about 1,20,000 persons were arrested, and decimal record of wholesale violence, physical outrage, shooting and beating up, punitive expeditions, collective fines on the villagers and seizure of lands and property of villagers was found in India. The League delegation report was issued in 1933. Chittaranjan Das, political guru of Subhash Chandra Bose, one of the revolutionaries of the period, was also called terrorist by the Britishers during the non-cooperation and Caliphate movements. This exile in Burmese prison witnessed the transformation of a lieutenant to a leader. Between numerous spells in prison, he played a major role in the student, youth and labor movements. India believed should become an independent federal republic. He warned Indian nationalists not to become a queer mixture of political democrats and social conservatives. His demand at the Calcutta Congress of 1928 that complete independence instead of dominion status should be the goal of Indian nationalists was a sign that he was a step ahead of his contemporaries. The Official Secrets Act 1923 The Act in 1923 is one of the most draconian laws still in force in the India. A legacy of the British Raj, it had often resulted in grave miscarriages that have been blotted the record books of Indian judiciary and sullied our reputation among democratic nations. Eminent jurists and civil rights activists have unequivocally voiced the opinion that infamous statute should be scrapped. After the enactment of the Right to Information Act in 2005, it has no right to exist, a fact that has been pointed out by Virappa Moily heading the second Administrative Reform Commission that has already recommended its repeal. Unfortunately, the proposal was shot down by the bureaucrats in the Home Ministry based on the objection from the intelligence agencies. The argument advanced for its survival are based on the hypothesis that this will hamper the prosecution of spies. The first record of regulation deals with the official secrets in the notification issued by the Foreign Department of the Government of India on 30th August 1843, which prohibited officials from making official documents public. At that time, government officials often became correspondents for the newspaper, especially during war. On 8 July 1875, the Home Department issued a resolution that the officials could not become a correspondent for a newspaper only after obtaining permission from his office, which was normally granted. On 3rd June 1885, the Home Department issued another resolution that stated that the Viceroy had noticed that information of a confidential nature frequently appeared in newspapers. In October 1887, the Secretary of State in London wrote to India informing them of the advice to the colonies. The Commander-in-Chief asked for a similar law to be enacted in India. On 1st June 1888, the Adjunct General in India forwarded the draft bill to the Military Department to prevent unauthorized entry and making of sketches of military and naval stations, to be called the Indian Fortifications Act 1818. In September 1818, the Official Secret Act was passed. In Britain, it was applicable to India, but since it was considered unsuitable to the Indian legal system, it was decided to enact a separate law for India. The Indian Official Secret Act of 1889 was passed by the Viceroy Executive Council on 17th October 1889. There was no discussion. The Viceroy, Lord Lansdowne, gave the assent on the same date. Coming to Defence of India Act, another statute that was enacted during World War I was a Defence of India Criminal Law Amendment Act 1915. The partition of Bengal 1905 created considerable resentment and unrest in Bengal. There were several cases of subversion and sabotage. This caused alarm even in Britain, prompting the Secretary to State to write to the Viceroy. It was decided to enact a new law similar to Irish Act of 1881, which envisaged trial by tribunals against which there was no appeal. Act number 14 was passed in December 1908, which provided for speedy trial of certain offences and prohibition of dangerous association. It was to apply in Bengal and Assam in December 1914. The Lieutenant Governor of Punjab, Sir Michael Dyer, wrote to the Viceroy asking for the enactment of an ordinance to deal with the Gadar rights and the Komatagat Maro attorneys who had become very active in Punjab. He wanted a law on the lines of frontier crimes regulation and frontier murderous outrages regulation of 1901 that was in force in Northwest Frontier Province. In March 1915, Dyer again wrote to Calcutta, giving instances of terrorist attacks to buttress his arguments. Finally, the Viceroy relented, but he did not approve the ordinance that Dyer wanted. Instead, he ordered a bill to be introduced in the council to enact a law on these lines. Of Defence of Realm Act had been enacted in Britain shortly after the commencement of World War I. The bill for enactment of the Defence of India Act was introduced in the Executive Council on 12th March 1915. It provided for the issue of regulation by the local government. Offenders could be tried by commission appointed for this purpose. Instead of the normal courts, there was no appeal against the sentence during the debate. The bill was strongly opposed by Madan Mohan Malviya ji and Surendranath Banerjee, but was passed on 18th March 1915. The Defence of India Act was made applicable to three divisions, Lahore, Jalandhar and Multan, and not whole of Punjab. Later, it was also made applicable to Meerut and Banaras, districts of the United Province. It was to remain in force until 6 months after the end of the war, after which it would automatically lapse. Coming to pre-independence period, in the pre-independence period, the Bengal Regulation of 1812 and 1818 were some of the earliest law in British India to deal with the internal security, incorporate the provisions of the preventive detention without having to commit the detainee to trial. In the presidencies of Madras and Bombay, similar laws had been enacted in 1819 and 1827 respectively. Prisoners under these regulations had no right of habeas corpus. Section 491 of CRPC introduced the writ of habeas corpus in 1882. In 1907, emergency ordinances were issued in Punjab and in Eastern Bengal and Assam on the 50th anniversary of 1857 mutiny. This allowed the public meetings and the Indian press was subjected to controls of limit rebellious materials being published. The Explosive Substances Act and the Newspaper Act were passed in June 1908 to try and arrest agitators. In June 1907, local governments were further authorized to initiate measures against local press, publishing serious materials among civilian population or the army. The Indian sociologist was banned in India in September 1907, and in November that year the Prevention of Seditious Meetings Act was passed. In February 1910 saw the introduction of the Indian Press Act, which allowed provincial governments to ask for punitive securities for up to 5,000 rupees from the newspapers likely to initiate sedition and violence. This act resulted in number of nationalist publications closing down, unable to provide such surety. Pre-liberal era. With the spurt in terrorism, many countries have enacted appropriate and stringent anti-terrorism laws. India too has various enactments for dealing with terrorism in past. The Terrorist and Destructive Activities Act, Prevention Act 1987 allowed to lapse in 1995. The Prevention of Terrorism Act 2002 repealed in 2004. Unlawful Activities Prevention Amendment Act 1967, which came into force with certain amendments in 2004, and the National Security Act 1980. However, some of these legislations were allowed to lapse repeal, as it was contended that the powers conferred on the law enforcement agencies had the potential and fact had been misused. Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 1967 was enacted to provide for the more effective prevention of certain unlawful activities of the individuals and associations and for the matter connected with it. It empowered appropriate authority to declare any association as unlawful if it is carrying out unlawful activities. This law was comprehensively amended by the Unlawful Activities Prevention Amendment Act 2004 to deal with the terrorist activities. Current internal security situation, the Administrative Reform Commission chaired by Sri Veerappa Moiliji had recommended the repeal of the Official Secrets Act. This was opposed by the Ministry of Home Affairs and the intelligence agencies, who contended that there were ties their hands and this will not be able to prosecute offenders such as those involved in naval war. Room leak cases. Another argument advanced for its continuation is that it has stood the test of time and the conviction rate for charges under this act is very high. The first point is not really valid because there are adequate safeguards to cater for military offences in the military acts themselves, which are in fact more stringent than the Official Secrets Act. Hence, even if the OSA is repealed, it would not make much of the difference. To conclude, the laws to deal with the internal security are highly sophisticated and is regularly been updated to meet with the needs of the hour. The budgetary allocations of maintaining internal security is also reasonable and keeps on increasing with the need. The problem is basically of enforcement of these laws and accountability of the law enforcement agencies, but the work of the National Investigation Agency is commendable. Thank you.